Guys, with this COVID-19 pandemic, many persons are having difficulties in finding monies to pay their rent. And this week I want to dedicate this video to those persons who are having those struggles, to speak about the relationship between the landlord and tenant during this COVID-19 period. This journey is going to start now, so stay tuned, alright? First things first, whenever you're speaking about landlord and tenant's relationship, you must speak about a tenancy agreement. Let me go ahead and explain what that means. Tenancy agreements really are legal agreements or contracts between the landlord and tenant that would guide the behavior of the both parties during this tenancy. It would normally state the names of the parties, it would state when rent is to be paid, how much rent is to be paid. It speaks about the rights and obligations and the responsibilities of both parties. It speaks about the specific period as well, if it's a fixed tenancy agreement or if it's a periodic agreement, that being week to week or month to month. Now, normally these agreements are done in writing. Ideally they should be in writing, but some persons do have oral agreement. It doesn't mean that your agreement is invalid. Once it reaches the relevant standard, it's a good agreement, but you probably should consider having a written agreement, alright? So I could imagine the amount of persons asking themselves now, where did I put that agreement? Is it in the drawer? Is it in the cupboard? Is it in the wardrobe? Is it in the crick span? Did I put it in the fridge? Did I burn? I hope you did not burn the agreement, alright? It's going to really help in the conversation that you're going to have with your landlord, or if you're a landlord, the conversation you're going to have with your tenant. Now hear this, there are many questions that are being asked by persons, landlord and tenants, such as, if the tenant contracts COVID-19, does the tenant have an obligation to inform the landlord? What about if the tenant does get the virus? Could the landlord evict the tenant because of that? What about if another tenant contracts the virus? Does the landlord now have an obligation to inform other tenants? What about the right of a landlord to inspect premises? Is that right suspended during this period? Concerns about persons coming into your home. Now all of those are questions that we could have a conversation about, but if you want that, just leave a comment in the comment section below and tell me if I should do a video regarding that. But today I want to speak about a very crucial topic that a lot of persons are having some concerns about. Whether or not a tenant could be evicted from premises if they don't pay rent. So let's dive into that question now. Listen, the short answer to that question is yes. The landlord can evict a tenant from the premises if he doesn't pay rent, if he doesn't pay rent on time, if he doesn't pay the amount of rent. Remember, we always have to look at what the tenancy agreement speaks of. And this is one of the terms and conditions. And if that particular covenant is broken, it means that the tenant is in breach of the agreement. And it now empowers the landlord to seek redress through the court. The amazing thing though about the law is that you always balance powers and rights with processes. So it means that there must be a process that the landlord must invoke in order for him to exercise that particular right. So let's have a look into that now. I like to call this process the NE process. N stands for there being sufficient notice. Once there is sufficient notice, if the tenant doesn't move, then there must be an application by the landlord. If the application is then filed, there must be a hearing by the court, and then when there's a hearing and a court order is given, then there's going to be an enforcement of that particular order. So let's go through each of them now. This process starts with a notice. The landlord must serve the tenant a notice to quit seeking possession. This notice would normally include the reasons why the tenant must leave as well as the date by which the tenant has to leave. Remember, if it's a monthly tenancy, the tenant must be served one clear month to vacate the premises. If it's a weekly tenancy, he must be served one clear week to vacate the premises. Tenants could stop the notice from running if they pay the rent that is due. But if tenants don't pay the rent and they don't want to vacate after the specified period, what does the landlord need to do? The landlord needs to make an application to the specific court. The second step involves the landlord making an application at the specific court to get what is called an eviction order, or some persons call it a possession order. Let me explain that. It's more or less a direction in a written form from a judicial officer, that be in the court, directing and ordering that the tenant is to vacate or leave the premises by a specific date. When this application is filed by the landlord, there are 2 points that must be considered. One, the court is going to assign a date when this matter is going to be heard, and secondly, the defendant or the tenant in this particular case must be given sufficient notice to attend the hearing. At this hearing, the court would listen to the stories and the evidence of the both parties, the landlord and the tenant, and give due consideration before the court actually makes an order. The tenants in these cases would normally ask for more time or would state why they should not be evicted. During this process, the rent continues to accrue, and if the tenant does not remedy the specific breach, then the landlord needs to enforce his order. If the tenant doesn't leave the premises by the date stated in the eviction order, or doesn't come into a specific agreement with the landlord, then the landlord cannot personally enforce the order by changing the locks or cutting the utilities and all of that. No, the landlord has to go with the police officers and then execute the eviction order or the possession order on the tenant, and as well as his belongings, so that he could leave the premises according to the court order. Let's summarize what we know so far. 1. If a tenant does not pay rent, the landlord can evict that tenant. And secondly, there is a process that the landlord needs to invoke in order to evict a tenant. That would include having notice, having an application, having a hearing, and then enforcing that order. Now, you guys, the question that we all have to ask is whether or not landlords should be evicting tenants during this time. Now, I don't have the key to that question, but I think there are some practical considerations that landlords need to consider and to reflect upon in making that decision. Let's go through these. One of the major considerations is actually invoking the court's jurisdiction during this time. The courts, they are dealing with matters fit for hearing. If you haven't already, check out my other videos. I spoke about the type of matters that the courts, they are hearing during this time. Now, you may get through if you do an affidavit stating the facts and the reasons as to why this matter should be heard. For example, if there's irreparable damage, or if there's some safety concerns, and so the court may listen to these type of matters. A next consideration that landlords need to consider is that during this time it may be difficult to actually find replacement tenants. Now, especially if you have a tenant who is a person who pays on time and just experiencing some difficulties, you would not want that tenant to leave. So you need to also consider that. So those are 2 considerations among others for the time being. Guys, in life, it's important to always be as balanced in your reasoning and thinking as much as possible. Now, it's a reality that landlords are also being affected by this scenario, as well as tenants. But to have a one-size-fits-all approach may not be the best method at this time. It's always best for parties to consider their circumstances and situation within their context and see what might be fair and reasonable in the circumstances. So what might be a good idea is for the landlord and the tenant to have a conversation and see what might be the best way forward that is fair to all parties as we go through this COVID period. So I don't have the key, as I said, but we have to really ask ourselves, what is it going to be? Is it going to be a heart-to-heart conversation as we look out for each other during this COVID-19 period? Or is it going to be hit the road, Jack, don't you come back, no more, no more, no more? Just before we end the legal journey today, I'm reminded that we live in a global community, and I've seen policies and legislation being passed around the world to deal with their particular situation when it comes to landlord and tenants. I'm seeing where there's a ban for the eviction of tenants for non-payment of rent for 3 months. and then there's a period of time for tenants to repay the outstanding. That's up to 12 months in certain places, where there's clear laws that landlords are to not harass or intimidate the tenant, and various other laws around the world. And I'm just mentioning these so that we'll have a deeper understanding of what's happening around the world. Never to really criticize or to say that, you know, we aren't doing something well here, but it's one that it's hope that we'll all learn from each other as we get through this period together. So if you haven't, I want you to subscribe, so just do that. That's the little subscribe button at the bottom there, as well as hit that notification bell so you'll get all of my messages. I want to hear from you. If you are from a next country, I want you to leave a comment and tell me what's happening over there. How are you guys dealing with this when it comes to landlord and tenants during this COVID period? And I want to connect with all of you, so please just leave a comment, ask a question, tell me what it is that you want us to have a conversation about, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in my next video. So thank you so much for joining me today, and we will see very soon. So take care and be safe. Yeah.